Finkelstein, Professor of Higher Education here at Seton Hall, and I'd like to begin our time today by introducing Dean Maureen Gillette, the Dean of the College of Education, who is directly responsible for us having this event. And we're certainly grateful to her, but I think she'd like to say a word of welcome. Dean Gillette.
Welcome to Seton Hall. For those of you who have been here before, welcome back. For those of you who may not have been here before, I hope you'll take a day to walk around the campus because it's really lovely even when it's covered in a foot of snow. How many people are alum? Raise your hand, alum, yeah. How many people are current doctoral students? Can you stand up? Stand up, stand up. Kevin, you gotta come. Yeah, there you go. Look around the room. So if you are an alum, look at those people and give them a word of encouragement and advice before you leave today, because just from walking around the fourth floor of Jubilee Hall, I know that on some days they need it more than others. I'm really thrilled to be able to be a part of this today. I've used Dr. Aram's work in my own work, but most importantly, it's always great to have a fellow dean who started out as a classroom teacher. I think that those of us who began our careers with kids have a keen understanding of what it takes to work with adults in higher ed. And I'm not going there. Just make up your own reason. And I think also it gives us, we bring a real concern to the work of higher ed because we know what's coming from the pre-K-12 world. And so I know that every day I get up and I think not only about the kids in my family who I love, who are traversing the public school system for better or for worse today, and the private school system, but also what my hopes and dreams for them are. I know that every parent has those same hopes and dreams for their kids. And we want them to get to higher ed, but we want them to be successful in higher ed so they're successful when they leave us. So it's thrilling for me to be here with all of you today, and I look forward to a great talk. And I will turn it back over to Dr. Finkelstein so we can get on with the talk and no further ado.
Thank you, Maureen. I guess I won't do much ado then. I want to specifically welcome you to this second event in our Distinguished Lecture Series. And this is a series we began in 2016, and our purpose was really to expand some of the conversations that we have in our graduate programs in higher education in Jubilee Hall to the broader university, the broader New Jersey higher education community, and to re-engage some of our alumni in these discussions that they so sorely, no doubt, miss, having moved on, and establish connections between all of the above. So that's what we have been trying to do. The first event, which some of you may have attended, brought Philip Altbach here to talk about what it means to be a college or university in an era of globalization. When first class is something that people don't talk about anymore, they talk about world class. That's the term. We had that in October on Halloween. Now it's St. Patrick's Day. This is our second one. And buoyed by the first, we are focusing on nothing less than the most essential issue in higher education or education of any kind, and that is student learning. Just a quick historical moment. This is going to be quick. Think back to 2010. 2010 was a year when higher education was bearing the brunt of the 2008 recession. It really didn't hit a lot of campuses until 2009, 2010. Okay? And that was a time when there were various camps in the broader higher education and policy-making community. There were individuals in one camp raising questions about the cost of higher education. Is it worth going to college? What about retention? What about graduation and degree completion? What are we doing in there? That was one sort of set of conversations, one bubble, and there was another bubble going on, and that bubble was about, well, what are we doing in our colleges? Are we? This was the time when people were decrying the commercialization of higher education. Are we selling ourselves short? Are we missing what is essential about our work? And that was begun. You know, Derek Bach had a little book about our underachieving colleges in about 2005 or 6 or so. So that was kind of the context. And fast forward to 2011, and there was a lightning bolt, a thunderclap, and that lightning bolt and thunderclap were academically adrift. A book by our speaker today, Richard Era, and Josipa Roxa. And that book brought some serious data and some serious analysis to the issue of student learning and what's going on in higher education. And that book resonated with all of these different camps. It's one of those books that was something of a little bit of a touchstone for conversation, certainly on this very campus, but I think campuses around the nation. So we are fortunate to have Richard Aram with us today. Richard has since that historic 2011 publication gone on to follow up on some of the students. He's moved beyond looking at general intellectual skills to assessment in the disciplines, and he's actually become a dean. And now I think has a slightly different perspective on all of this. So we're going to take Richard's going to speak for about 45 minutes, possibly as long as an hour until the bus leaves at 11 for New York. And then we're going to have some conversation here until about 11:30. So please join me in welcoming Richard Aram.
Thanks, Marty. And just to clarify, I will not be on the bus. I'll stay with you for the conversation. And when we scheduled this, we knew we were going up against St. Patrick's Day. Weren't that concerned about that. But then when I opened up the sports page and realized we were also going to go up against the basketball team, I'm really grateful that the room is still full today.
It's at 1:30.
It's at 1:30. Okay, well, so the bus is at 11 and the game is at 1:30. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the research base for around higher ed learning and the larger context, why we care about learning. And then the second half of the talk, tell you a little bit about this project on assessment that I've been working on. And I think you can only understand why a social scientist like me is spending time on this assessment project when you have a full appreciation of the research base that I became aware of and felt compelled to be doing this other institutional work. And so to get into that conversation, I'll start by framing the issue in the following way. We live in a time, given changes in the economy and globalization, where a higher education degree is critically important for adult success. And that's true for individuals in the labor market, but let me pause here for a second to also say it's important for democratic citizenship. Right? Once you have fragmented information flows, you don't have CBS Nightly News, Walter Cronkite telling you the way the world is, but you have to figure out the way the world is with all this information. You need critical thinking skills to be able to make sense of the world, to distinguish between real news and fake news. And so higher education and the skills we impart in higher education, essential for individual labor market success, but also essential for democratic citizenship. And our economy and our democratic system depend on our ability to do that work well. And it's a challenge because we're more and more dependent on that, but we're also increasingly serving a diverse set of students. And just to give a sense of that and where the country is heading, I can talk about the institution I just joined, UC Irvine. UC Irvine, 50% of the students there are first generation, and 80% of them are non-white. And that is the future of this country. We have to be successful with those students if we're going to do the other things that are essential, have a functioning democratic system, and also have a competitive economy. Now, the problem is, unfortunately, we're failing to accomplish that mission. And if you look closely, it becomes very evident and apparent if you look at the data, which I'll share with you. So I would say we're failing in 3 key ways. We're failing in terms of student completion, we're failing in terms of learning outcomes, and we're failing in terms of post-college transitions for students today. And I call this institutional underperformance because this is not a problem of kids today. This is not a problem of K-12. This is a problem of higher education, and I'll show you evidence of that shortly. So the first one is student completion. I would be remiss if we didn't start there and say that increasingly today the problem is not access to college. It is not access to college. Students are going to college. The problem is students are not finishing. They're not completing college once they're attending them. And that's particularly true for non-white students. And I'll show you the data today. And this is all public information. This is readily available. If you're a speaker like me and are going to come to Seton Hall, you can spend 5 seconds on the internet and find out what the completion rate is at Seton Hall. It's better than the national average. You should be commended for that. There's a lot of room for growth, a lot of room for improvement. So let me show. This is from Bowen, Bill Bowen, and Michael McPherson and Matt Chingo's work, where they looked at college completion and identified this problem where, again, 50% of students, 50% in a typical school don't finish the degree that they started at a 4-year college. And you see here the figures all the way on the left, high school graduation rate, and it's separated by ethnicity and gender. So you have all the way on the left, white males, African American males, Hispanic males. You see a gap in college completion, but around 80% or more people finish high school. And then the next set of graphs is going on to college. And you see many students are going on to college. About 50% or more of college graduates, 50% or more of high school graduates go on to college. There is a gap between by race and ethnicity in the figures, but the gap is relatively small. And then you get to college, the third figure here, and just so we're all looking at the same thing here. I'm talking about here. And there's a gap here, white males completing college, African American males, Hispanic males. The gap is much bigger than the problem in high school, much bigger than the problem of people going to college. The problem is diverse students finishing college, right? That is a problem that we have to address if we're going to meet the challenges of the 21st century in serving increasingly diverse students. Learning. So this book, this will be a quick discussion of it, a review of the work that came out in 2011, Academically Adrift. And in that book, we were able to demonstrate empirically that there was a problem in higher education around learning with, first and foremost, limited academic rigor. Limited academic rigor. Now let's start there. If you don't ask students to do much, guess what? They don't learn much, right? And how do we know we're not asking them much? Well, we did a very simple thing as social scientists. We asked students, what were they doing? What were they experiencing? And what the students would tell you is, first about classes with writing. We asked, how many classes did you take this semester where you were asked to write more than 20 pages over the course of the semester? How many classes? 2, 3, 4? 45% of them said 0 classes. We have no class that asks us to write more than 20 pages over the course of the semester. What about reading? More than a third of the students said we have no class that asks us to read, more than 40 pages per week. Right? Half don't have a single class that asks them to write 20 pages over the course of the semester. Right? That's you think about your weekly response memo. If you're like me, you have the students read something, write a memo, page-and-a-half memo. You get to 20 pages pretty quickly. Nope. Their students today are not experiencing that. They're not experiencing being asked to read books with more than 40 pages. So you could assign academically a drift. That's 160 pages book. You would have to spend about a third of the semester on that book. You can if you don't like the reading and writing questions, you don't trust those, ask the students how many hours they're studying. And what they will tell you, more than a third say, I study alone less than 5 hours per week, less than an hour a day. And we had the transcripts of these kids, we looked at them, and they had a 3.2 grade point average, right? No reading asked of many students, no writing asked of many students, no hours studying put in, and a 3.2 grade point average. Now let me talk about the hours studying for a second. This is a time use chart. What are students doing with their time? Well, these are all full-time college students we looked at in our study. We were in 24 colleges and universities and about 2,400 students. Hours in class, 15 hours in class if you go to all your classes. Of course, we know from the research that in the big lecture halls, the attendance is about 2/3 at best. So they're not spending 15 hours in the classes, but we'll assume it for this pie chart. Hours studying, if you add in the hours studying with friends, which unfortunately in our book we find to be associated not with growth in learning outcomes, but actual declines in learning outcomes. Right? This is not that, not that you can't have structured group activity and group work, but that's when you say how many hours you spend studying alone, how many hours you spend studying with your friends. The friends is the same as time in a fraternity and sorority. It's negatively associated with gains in learning. So, but let's add that all in together. 12 to 13 hours is the average. 15 hours in class, 12 to 13 hours studying. Total full-time college students today, best case 28 hours. Question? Sure, I would welcome it.
Is that, when you say studying, is that including reading the chapter?
Yep, everything. Studying, preparation. In the back of, because we're social scientists so interested in replication, the back of the book has the survey. And we took all our items, we didn't make them up, we took them from existing instruments in the field. So it's probably from the NSSE, National Survey of Student Engagement.
Can I ask how, is studying subjectively defined by the student? How did you measure studying?
So again, it's self-reported. It's an exaggeration of what actually occurs. How do we know this? because the Bureau of Labor Statistics does time diary, as a different study, a time diary study where at the end of every day, what did you do this hour, what did you do that hour, and their estimate of hours studying much lower than ours. So this is the best case. How many hours did you spend studying? Oh, I spent 12, 13 hours. It's the best case. And again, if you go into the time use data, you'll find that students will say we spend about 3.5 times more in socializing and recreation than studying on campus. And again, all you have to do is ask them this, they'll tell you that. And think about high school. They start high school with 35 hours in the class time, homework. They're spending 45 hours per week maybe, the college-going kids, academic, and then they get to college. It's a select group that gets to college, and the academic time shrinks. You would expect it to grow. And again, the point, limited academic rigor. This is over time. It wasn't always that way. So in the 60s, a full-time college student spent 25 hours studying, 15 hours in class, 40 hours, full-time college student. Today, a full-time college student, the hours studying has dropped in half. These are different surveys that have been done over time. So these are, like I said, they're empirical facts. We know from the surveys, this isn't opinion, this isn't old fogeyism, this isn't old Dean Aram up here telling you something like back in the day. This is the empirical data of what students will say over time. It's dropped in half. The meaning of being a college student today is different than it was several decades ago. Gotcha. Okay. It's also, so I'm a social scientist. I like to compare. Less than high school, less than it was a few decades ago. The other comparison I'd like to make is it's less than other advanced economies. And so there's something in Europe called the Euro Student project. And if you look at hours of academic time, full-time college students in the US compared to the European countries, we are second to last. The Slovak Republic is lower than us. Everyone else is more than us. And interestingly, the hours studying, when you look at the European country, Europe does something a little different than we do. The US model for four-year college education is we send kids off to college. They go away to college. Residential dorms, if they're not in residential dorms, they're often living around campus. The old commuting model doesn't exist very much anymore in the US. There are places it still does. Seton Hall might have some commuting kids. UC Irvine, the place I'm teaching, does. But in general, that's not the model. And one of the interesting things you find is that a very, very high correlation of academic hours studying, academic time, and living with your parents. The more the system is based on living at home and going away to college, the more studying there is overall as a whole. Now, again, this is to get a little complicated here. It's not true that commuting students necessarily spend more time studying than people in residence. It's a little different argument. Overall, the norms about how much studying you have to do decline overall on average when the system is set up with these emerging adult subcultures around colleges and universities that are not focused on academics. They're focused on all sorts of other things.
I had a question, I guess you'll probably get to it. In Europe, most of the students, they don't have jobs. And they also have subsidized education. You are equal in.
Yeah. So in the study, our study where we looked at full-time college students, four-year college students, many of them had jobs, mostly limited in amount of hours, to 10, 15 hours a week. And that was not in any way distracting to their learning outcomes. It had no negative effect on their learning outcomes until it went to more than 20 hours per week off-campus work. But there were very few students actually in our study with those conditions. So it is a reality. It is a reality that the model for four-year college, residential college education we have in this country is very expensive. It's twice the cost of the European model. Twice the cost of the European. Sending kids to live away from home, and then you not only have to create residential halls for them, you have to create this whole infrastructure in student affairs to provide service and support for them. It's a very expensive model. Higher education costs twice as much in the US per student than it does in Europe.
So, if it seems like that students, so being a college student, you're saying, is fundamentally different. So it's more about the social experience and that dynamic than it is about the academic experience for us. But so I'm from a community college, and so we have this weird, so our students live with their parents, so we're all commuter, but they also work, most of them, 20 hours or more off campus. So
So this study is just full-time four-year college students. The community college is a very different, So let's hold off on that until the questions and answers. But I like the other part you said directly or specifically. The meaning of being a college student today is not academic, it's social. And so I'm going to jump this. Here's what students will tell you if you ask them about their academic engagement. I'm going to say, and we asked them about their social engagement and academic engagement in the follow-up study. The first study, we just asked them about their academics because we assumed college was about academics. And then the data came back to us and hit us over the head. And, nope, that's not what we're doing here. So we started asking these other questions. When you ask them about their social engagement, they go on and tell you pages and pages about how they're socially engaged in college. You ask them about their academic engagement, here's a representative sample of what the college, these are seniors in college, will tell you. I was a very good student. I did all my homework and studied for all my tests. That's the meaning of academic engagement. Very minimum.
College senior.
Senior, college senior. Actually, and if you look at academic motivation from freshman to senior year, it goes down. Half the kids drop out, and the kids that stay, their academic motivation declines. Second, another student, pretty committed. I went to 90–95% of all my classes. I did all my homework, and for the most part, the readings. Third student. Actually, like I put forth a good deal of effort. I was great about going to class. I think I really only missed a handful of classes the entire time I was at college. I studied. Any homework I had to do, I did. Again, over and over, I did the work. Academic English, I did the work. I got a B+, I got an A-. Just wasn't much work to do. And then another one. I was fairly academically engaged, and I tried very hard not to fail most of my classes. I was a good student. I did my homework on time. I never missed deadlines. This is how students themselves will talk about their academic engagement.
It's sorry to ask a question, but this is just blowing my mind, to be honest. Can you go back to that previous screen? Whenever I get asked to write a letter of recommendation for a student, when a student asks me, they give me those reasons for why I should write a letter of recommendation for them. And when I say, well, that's what you're supposed to do, they look completely flummoxed.
Yeah, because again, it's how the meaning of college has changed, what their understandings are. But again, let me make it clear, my argument is not kids today, because in high school, the amount of hours studying has increased over time in these decades. Remember I showed you the decrease in college? It's something about college, it's something about how we define college that's changed. It's not a problem of the kids, it's a problem of us and our interaction with young people. Now, but thank you for this resonance. You know, we really try to capture, as social scientists, we try to capture the data as accurately as we can. We always put the survey, the interview protocol, so people can go out and replicate it and see if not, if we're making this up or indeed we're reporting it accurately.
Just one other thing to tag on to the comparison with European countries
Yeah.
at least. I don't know about others, but I know about that. The other difference is not just the model of how they go to school, sending off to school, things like that, but it's that, generally it's a 3-year, there's no general college. They're not experienced, so the curriculum is also very
Yeah.
different.
That's right.
I
That's
don't
right.
think-
So I don't want to go too far along the different European model, but yeah, they go in much more with a clearer focus. It's occupationally
Kind of
focused
going into
often.
junior year for us, right?
Yeah. So a word I'm going to use later around the assessment work is intentionality. In order for us to do a better job in higher education, we have to be more intentional. Right now, a lot of great stuff happens in higher education. A lot of magic happens, but it's almost accidental. It happens not because we've systematically planned it and designed for it, but in spite of the fact that we haven't, good things still happen. And I'll say something else, because again, this theme about inequality, that magic tends to happen more for privileged kids than non-privileged kids. So if you come in and you're without parents that can help guide and support and navigate and say, oh, do this, do that, and that, and then the magic happens, you're really handicapped by that lack of structure and intentionality in higher ed. So back to academically drift, and then I'll move on to the next piece. Little academic rigor. We have a test score measure of general skills, critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. We give it to them at the beginning of their freshman year. Again, the end of sophomore year, the end of their senior year. Not much movement on that. In fact, 45% of the kids don't go up even 1 point on that assessment if the assessment was scaled from 0 to 100. Right? Of that 45, many of them are actually, the scores are declining. So the other point, though, is important here, significant variation. There's more variation within a college than across colleges. So I don't know what the difference in learning is between UC Irvine and Seton Hall, but I would strongly predict that there's more variation within Seton Hall than between Seton Hall and UC Irvine. There are places here that are exemplary, where kids are working hard and learning a lot, and then there are parts that are factories of failure here. And so it's all about kind of, can you create the institutional environment where you're addressing the problems, and so that you have more uniform positive outcomes. One other thing about variation in the, worth noting, in the arts and science core of the university, you have slightly greater gains in this critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. Those are the parts of the university that have slightly more academic rigor. Not the academic rigor from several decades ago, but more academic rigor than in some other pockets like education. I'm a dean of an education school, business, communication, so on. Now let's move to the next book. I said underperformance in completion, underperformance in learning, underperformance in terms of supporting adult transitions. Adult transitions into the labor market, adult transitions into adulthood, into democratic citizenship. Now, before I talk about our research here, let me just make sure you know our research has been trumped. I hate to use that word today because it's loaded. Our research has been superseded by the work of an economist, Raj Chetty. You know who he is? You should, everyone write this down, please. His first name is Raj, R-A-J, last name Chetty, C-H-E-T-T-Y. Because you can Google his name and find these resources, the Equality of Opportunity Project. He's an economist. He was at MIT. He's now moved to Stanford. And he conducted a research project where he got data on every kid who went to college in the U.S. 2000 to 2005, name of every kid, matched that data to data on their parents' income tax data, and where they ended up when they were 30, today, 2 years ago, 2014 tax data. Let me say that again. He's got the population of college students and where their parents' income was, and he averages the parents, and he's a very good economist, he averages the income over 5 years when they're at home from age 14 to 19, and where they ended up. And he's released all that information by college. So if you're a social scientist like me, or maybe a parent or a potential parent, you can go on the web and say, Seton Hall, and pull up what is the percentage of kids from Seton Hall whose parents came from the bottom quintile, the bottom 20% of parents economically. I did that. You can also you can also look at that data and say, okay, that many kids came from the bottom quintile. Of that group, what was the percentage that ended up in the top quintile by the age 30? That is, to what extent did the college and university provide a social mobility pathway for young people? Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I told you it was important. I told you I was like, there's a rule of thumb. When a social scientist doesn't talk about his own research, but talks about someone else's research, you know it's important. We like to talk about our own work a lot. So the name again is Raj Chetty, C-H-E-T-T-Y. And if you, the best way to get to the website is do Raj Chetty New York Times. And in late January, the New York Times did a front page article on this. I think it was front page. And they put all the data up on the website so that it's an easy interface. And of course, because it was late January, everyone's, we're all, regardless of our politics, you can't but be transfixed by Washington. And so you might have missed it. Go back and take a look at it, because it's a game changer for higher education. Higher education for decades has said, we don't want this data out. We don't want this information out. But the economists can do, they did an end run around it by doing the research on it. In a way that I did an end run around it. I did, the information in a modern information, a democratic system, you allow social scientists to do research, information about these things comes out.
I have a question. Did his study just look at students in college being right after high school? In other words, he wasn't looking at older adults, just 18-year-olds?
Yes, exactly. He restricts the data just to traditional age kids. He assigns the colleges, a lot of kids go to multiple places. He assigns them to the college they went to for the greatest amount of time. There's no international kids, so if your parents don't have income tax data, you're not in it to study. There's some variance, but there's very concrete information out there. And the news, you should go take a look. I looked at Seton Hall's. If you guys are better than average, there's room for growth.
In your work and in
this set of work, does it look at the ratio, I guess, of these students? I'm going to assume some students today still pay for their college experience, even though it might be a minority, and how that as a factor contributes to their learning and outcomes, because they might be presumably more invested literally in their experience.
Yeah.
Or if in the case they're unable, like, or they don't assume that responsibility, the cost is so overwhelming that they're just like,
Right.
forget this, I'm not finishing.
So the Rod-Shetty work doesn't do that. It's just exactly what I described. Income tax data, parents, college graduates, the college they went to. We do. We ask them questions about financial aid and financing. We don't find strong effects on the learning outcomes, in part because, like you said, it goes in both directions. In one sense, you got your own skin in the game. You might be more invested in your outcomes and learning. In another sense, you might have to work more. And so things are pulling in both directions. We couldn't find any relationship to the things we were looking at. And again, I think it's partly, again, as a sociologist, I'm very concerned about the norms, what people in general think something is. What are our assumptions, our taken for granted assumptions about what being a college student is and a college professor. And those things, we believe, have shifted and are responsible for a lot of the outcomes we're getting. And so, regardless of if the individual has a loan or not, they're affected by these norms. They're affected by what their roommate, freshman roommate is thinking, what the person across the hall, and so on. So anyway, you look, we didn't have the Rod-Shetty data here. We could have matched the 24 colleges. Oh, one more question.
One little add-on that there were two articles that the New York
Yes.
Times pulled out on Shetty. One that looked just at the highly selective or like the top-ranked institutions,
Yeah.
but one that showed every piece of the data.
Yeah.
And what you can look at that's mainly, I think, for this audience that might be interesting is social mobility. So I think you touched on it, like let's say what part of the population did you and your family come from, but by going to that school, where did you end up? So what kind of upward mobility did it provide you with? So let's say if your family made, $20,000 as a median household income by attending Seton Hall, now you've become part of the upper quintile of the population. What percentage of your students actually made that? And that was, one of the groundbreaking things about this.
Yeah, that's right. There were in fact two articles in the New York Times. The one that you should go to is the one that says something like the great working class colleges in the U.S. And that'll have the link to this portal that the New York Times set up with that you can at least put in Seton Hall and get all these interesting statistics. Or if you're a social scientist or a doctoral student in an education program, you can go to the website, the Rod-Shetty. They put all the data up, not the raw data, but the Excel data for each colleges and universities up on their website. And so I just, the day after I downloaded it all, like, wow, there's so much to be done with this. Anyway, I see Marty been working like at a time, so we'll keep moving forward. Point here, this was our own work where we followed the same kids, remember 24 colleges and universities, 2,400 students. The first book was the first 2 years of college. This was the next 2 years. They're finished, and the 2 years out. And we find that we're looking at them right in the middle of the economic recession. Unlike Shetty, but it's a difficult time. They're not doing very well. And in fact, less than if the definition of doing well 2 years out of college is I have a full-time job where I'm making $30,000 or more, less than half of the students ended up in that category. Again, most of the students did not have a full-time job where they were making $30,000 or more. 2 years out, it was a difficult time. In fact, 23% were unemployed or in unskilled jobs, that is jobs where the typical person in that job was a high school graduate, hadn't gone to college, a cashier, or they were working less than 20 hours per week. And 2 years out, about a quarter of them were living at home with their parents. 1 year out, it was a third. So a lot of them were back home living with their parents. Labor market outcomes, some of it's associated with the economy. I'm much more concerned, I said it in the beginning, with civic outcomes. Okay, you ready for this? We should have perhaps anticipated the electoral outcome if you had seen this finding. These are college graduates, many of them unemployed, living at home with their parents, lots of student debt. You'd think they had a lot of things to talk about politically. When we asked them, how often do you read a newspaper, in print or online, more than a third said monthly or never. Monthly or never, we read a newspaper in print or online, right? These are full-time college, 4-year college graduates 2 years out, right? No one told them, I guess, that actually that's a requirement of democratic citizenship. College graduates, it's a responsibility. You have to be civically engaged, and you can't be civically engaged unless you're informed. We asked them how often you discuss politics or public affairs with either your friends, family, or coworkers, and 39% said monthly or never. Right? Large numbers. They went through college and university, little asked of them academically, little effort, 2 years out, not doing so well, many of them, and not civically engaged at all, not keeping up with information. In terms of variation in outcomes, I will mention that some of the programs that didn't do so well early on in terms of learning outcomes actually did much better in terms of early labor market outcomes. Business programs, for example. Business programs were the worst in terms of gains in critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing, but the early labor market outcomes were some of the best. And why? Well, because students were engaged with internships, apprenticeships. They often had job placement services available. And they also likely learned subject-specific skills that we didn't test for with our general skills. What we did test for, this thing called the CLA, it did matter in terms of labor market outcomes. What students learn does have an effect on their labor market outcomes. I think the clearest way we saw this in our study was the question we asked: how many did you have a job and lose a job over the last year? And if you scored poorly on this measure, you were twice as likely to have lost your job than if you didn't score poorly. That is, you were hired, people thought they were getting a college graduate who could read, write, and have critical thinking, and then they were discovered, oh, actually this isn't the case, and the person twice as likely to lose the job. Also less likely to find a job. Okay, let me now pivot for the remaining time, and I want to have time for questions, so I'll do this fairly quickly, maybe another 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes on this current work I'm doing in response to that earlier empirical work. So for the last 3 or so years, I've been involved in this thing called the Measuring College Learning Project, which attempted to respond to this problem we identified earlier. And again, earlier we showed limited learning in higher education and limited growth in these general skills: critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. And by critical thinking, let me be clear what I mean there. The ability to kind of look at information and ask questions about its reliability and validity, its veracity. That is, fake news, real news. How do you distinguish between them? And that's a critical thinking skill. So the test that they gave of the items on the test was something like, you're working for a company about to buy a plane for your sales and marketing team, a similar plane crashes, your boss asks you to write a memo to them, should we buy the plane or not? And here's a set of documents. Here's the FAA accident report, here's a newspaper articles, here's some emails from the company trying to sell the plane to your boss. Here's the information, tell us what to do. And the naive reader, it takes the information from the boss trying to sell the plane to the company trying to sell the plane. That's information. Well, yeah, it's information, but they're trying to sell the plane to you, right? So you have to use critical thinking. You have to understand the bias of the information. So students did move up on that. One of the disappointments in our work was, Marty said it got a lot of attention. It did, but it didn't really have the impact on higher education that we had hoped, because many faculty said, okay, well, this is terrible. Hand-wringing. Terrible, terrible, terrible. But I'm an economist. I'm teaching my students not critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. I like all those things, but I'm teaching them economics. I'm teaching sociology. I'm teaching history. And so it was one-off. It was out there, and students themselves often identify with their own majors. So you won't find a single person in higher ed that says critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing isn't important. Everyone says it's important. It's on the mission statements of most colleges and universities. But it's one-off. And so we felt in order to make a difference, you had to move from the general to subject-specific, where faculty identities were and student identities were. And so we tried to do that in this project here, Measuring College Learning, where we worked with 6 disciplines, biology, business, communications, economics, history, and sociology. Serves 40% of undergraduate students. We believe the work has to be faculty-led and has to come out of the national disciplinary associations that represent faculty. So for economics, the American Economics Association, American Sociology Association, American History Association. They had to be around the table driving the work if the work was going to be impactful. Otherwise, it's going to be come from outside, like No Child Left Behind, and if you think K-12 was good at resisting No Child Left Behind, try higher ed on for size. Like we can resist anything. So it's not going to work top down, but it could work if we ourselves took ownership of it. And it wasn't from outside, but we were designing the assessments and projects from the start. The idea was we would move to these disciplinary concepts and competencies. We took that from biology. There's all this NSF funding in STEM field about improving learning outcomes in STEM. And they came up with a very smart way of thinking about learning outcomes. You have your disciplinary concepts and you have your disciplinary competencies. And get away from the old content knowledge, the old facts. Instead, what are the key concepts that your discipline is trying to teach? Articulate those. What are the key competencies? Articulate those, and that's what you should be trying to produce in your students and build assessments around. So that was the idea. And then around assessment design, what should an assessment look like if faculty were going to believe it and buy into it? And that assessment should not be of the character that it's just a multiple choice, fill in the bubbles. Because faculty generally don't like that. One exception, the economists, who said it's 6 fields, 6 disciplines, the economists were fine with that. They said, hey, precision, cost, this is great. Well, why not have multiple choice assessment? So I respect this has to be driven by the faculty doing the work. But all the other 5 said, no, we really don't like multiple choice. We want more open-ended questions where people are actually doing things with data and responding in more complete ways. And of course, no one instrument can measure learning outcomes satisfactorily. You need a larger portfolio, a larger set of multiple indicators of learning outcomes. But couldn't one measure of learning outcomes be something that was kind of standardized and could be given across colleges and universities? Right now, accreditation works. The accreditors come in and say, every department and every college and university, tell us how you're assessing learning outcomes. So you're at a place like Seton Hall, you're in a faculty with 5, 10 people, you got to make it up. And you're very good at making it up because you all have PhDs. But it often has the character of symbolic compliance, not something you truly believe in and are taking to heart. But imagine that your disciplinary association said, hey, here's something we're designing for you to use voluntarily if you want. So, like I said, this has been ongoing at the Social Science Research Council. With the idea is that we don't end up defining learning outcomes, and these are the learning outcomes for all time. It's iterative, of course, they change over time. Of course, the assessments are incomplete and need to be worked on over time. Phase 1, we had money to bring the faculty panels together. I'm going to show you quickly that. And then we've moved now to phase 2, where we're trying to build a few model assessments in a few programs for introductory courses. And the last thing I'll say here is that Callahee, there's a group in Europe we found, Callahee, they were the folks that brought tuning, the Bologna process, where they came up with standardized degrees across. If you're going to have a common European Union, you can't have an engineering degree in one place meaning something different than an engineering place in somewhere else, and have truly open borders where people are moving. So they came up with a faculty-led effort to come to an agreement on that. They're now working on this. Can they come up with some assessment tools to help further the work? Project principles, I already talked about that. This is one example in biology, the essential concepts and competencies. Notice how big the concepts are. Evolution, information flows, structure and function, pathways, they're big, big ideas. They're not these little, what's a mitochondria? Right, you want to draw they're big ideas, big concepts of how a biologist thinks about things, how an economist thinks about things, and so on. And then the competencies, you should be able to model, you should be able to apply quantitative reasoning, and so on. So you could build an assessment that asks about the concepts with these competencies built into them. So you'd ask them a question about modeling that involved quantitative reasoning, but also was in this kind of that asked them to invoke a concept. I was going to give it in sociology, just as an example. These are we had people that were experts in teaching, learning, and assessment in their fields. We tried to get a variety of institutions around the table. Typically, we'd have a community college representative around the panel also. Not the case here. And then sociology, you'd have something like this. Sociological eyes, social structure, socialization, stratification, social reproduction, social change, and then competencies on the other side. Right? What students should understand, what should they be able to know how to do. Last thing before my concluding slide. I told you to go to the Raj Chetty website, so if you're going to go to Raj Chetty, you got to come to this website, because this project, the Measuring College Learning Project, we have a book that came out. It's on the right-hand corner, and they're one of the participants. You could just wave it up. There's a book. You could buy the book from Jossie Bass for $35, but you don't have to. It's all available online for free download. we worked out an arrangement with the publisher that we would make all this stuff publicly available. So if you go to this website, it's a big name down below, but just Google MCL project, MCL Resource Center, MCL Resource Center. It'll come right up. And you'll see on the right-hand side there, the subject, biology, business. You can click on those, and you'll be brought to a white paper that's the subject experts in that field, their best thinking on learning outcomes and assessment in that discipline. They'll also, each of those will have a history of prior learning outcome efforts in the discipline, so they're interesting if you're in that particular field. And then the frameworks around assessments that they recommend. And one other resource we put in there, again, to demonstrate that we were open to iteration and criticism, we invited the leading folks in higher education learning into the project to critique it in the book. And so the book ends with 4 or 5 leading figures in higher education criticizing the work constructively, including people like Carol Gary Schneider, George Koo, Peter Ewell, Charlie Blake, so on. So anyway, you can see the critiques of it right there also. So yeah, please go to that if that's interesting. It could be a resource for you. And so let me conclude that, then we can get to questions. I hope I convinced you, if you didn't already know, that we need to do better in higher education. I love higher education. My whole life is as an educator. It has such promise and importance for our society and for our future. I am so grateful in 2017 to wake up in this historic moment that the country is facing and to be able to, in my daily life, make a difference in addressing some of the problems we're facing as a country. Right? We're in our republic is in crisis, and we are blessed with the opportunity to wake up and to be able to do this work, which is critical to these very problems. So we need to do better. The good news is there's a lot of innovation happening out in the field today. I told you a little bit about the assessment. There's also very interesting things happening around student advisement and support. Many of these things, technology is playing a role in. It's not, none of them technology is going to fix, but technology allows for us to do this work better. We're able to assess learning better. We're able to design advisement systems better with early predictive reporting and the like. We're able to be an economist and come up and get the data on every kid who went to college, merge it with their parents' income tax data. And that couldn't have happened 10 years ago. Could not have happened. The computing technology would not have allowed it. Right? The world is changing. Technology is not going to solve these problems, but it can be an ally. It can be useful here. So the last point is that there's work being done. Technology can be a part of the solution, but ultimately the work is going to depend on faculty coming together, taking ownership for these problems, and taking collective responsibility for them. And so the choice is really going to be up to us, and I hope you'll join me in some of that work. I'll start with a question there.
Thank you very much. I'm a professor in the psychology department here, and I don't raise this to be overwhelming or obstructionist, but how do you kind of think about some of what I think for a lot of faculty, there are a number of impediments to doing what you're talking about. One is a lot of them don't know how to teach what you're talking about. They don't know how to teach critical thinking. They've never been trained. The students that are coming in, as you talk about, are more diverse, and so it also means that, 20, 30 years ago, they were more prepared because it was a more selective sample, right, of like who came to college. And then the reward system, at least at places like Seton Hall, is not as bad or not such as like a big research granting institution, but certainly is still a lot about scholarship and publication. And at least in the experiences that I've seen, minimally around look what I'm doing to really innovate with critical thinking in my courses. So those are three big areas, and I don't know if you have thoughts on any of those or ideas in any of that.
No, I mean, I concur with you on all of them, that the work isn't going to be easy because of the reasons you mentioned. And so just to reiterate, so you're sure I heard you, it's very much the case that faculty have not been trained to teach in general, nor to teach with these increasingly diverse populations. Those are solvable problems though, right? You can design teaching and learning centers and elevate that, provide resources for that work, knowing that faculty haven't had that kind of preparation. I also think graduate programs are going to increasingly change to provide that kind of training, because we can no longer maintain the fiction that we're preparing everyone for these research jobs at the top elite research universities, when the vast majority of PhD students don't get those jobs, even if they're trained at a place like Stanford or Harvard. So you have to train, they have to train them in the kind of work that they're going to be doing, teaching and learning, and colleges and universities increasingly are going to be asked to focus on that, I think, because of stuff like the Raj Chetty. The news is going to be out. The word's out in the street. The last piece is around kind of the incentives in the institution need to change. And so you're absolutely right that the model for research universities of faculty productivity should be measured primarily around research and scholarship for tenure and for promotion and for raises and et cetera, diffused throughout higher education. It started at the top, but institutions end up wanting to look alike and they copy downward. And it doesn't make sense anywhere, but we've adopted that everywhere. Same with the residential college model. Right, Marty invited me here. I don't do as many talks on the road as I once did. But after Academically Adrift came out, I've gone to maybe more than 50 places, let's say. And every place you go visit is either building a new student dorm, first to first rate, with some chuckles. I didn't look that up here. Or a new student center, or new athletic facilities, and many all three. And they're, we're lamenting the price of higher education, but they're all copying each other. This is the model, and this is the model. How do you compete? How do you attract 17-year-olds to come to college and university where all this stuff is invisible, although the Raj Chetty stuff is not going to be as invisible as some people might like. So maybe some tougher questions will be asked, but in general, they're not asking about learning. They're asking about social amenities. And there's research out there that shows, except for the top 5% of kids that are academically age 17, the rest, the vast majority, pick their college and university for social amenities, not for investments in academic quality. So that's got to change too. None of it's easy and simple. So someone who hasn't asked the question yet, yeah.
Thank you for all your research. I spoke to you earlier how I referenced your book to do the research for my dissertation. And what I found was that, again, many professors are experts in their field, but not necessarily in the ability to teach, say, for example, critical thinking. So it was really discipline driven, that being like the philosophers, they love argument and reasoning skills. The historians loved synthesis. So my question became then, how do you teach critical thinking and align it with assessment when there's all these different definitions, even measures on what critical thinking is. Scientists, for example, love problem solving. So there's a real disconnect or lack of agreement on specifically what, to this day, the research still doesn't have an answer on what critical thinking is.
Yeah, no, that's right, and it's particularly a problem when you measure at the general level. This is critical thinking, but people disagree, often around their disciplinary lenses. So I think the way to address it is to go into these subject-specific assessments where there is agreement. So again, I'm a social scientist. Critical thinking all sounds good, great, but you talk to a social scientist, oh, that's reliability and validity. Ah, reliability and validity, I know how to teach that. Right? When you ground these higher order thinking skills or these competencies in the discipline, in the context, is when they can potentially have the most value and impact. And I should say there's also a debate in the field, the field of cognitive assessment around, can you measure higher order competencies like critical thinking in the absence of context? That's not domain specific. Some very smart people say you can't do that. It's got to be domain specific. There is no such thing as critical thinking in general. It's critical thinking about X. I don't know whether they're right or wrong. A lot of smart people disagree with them, but there definitely is a need for this kind of move beyond the general to kind of our actual work, or which again tends to be subject specific.
Excuse me, to sort of piggyback off of this current round of questioning, do you foresee the assessment that you talked about, the discipline-specific assessments, moving to a broader sort of accreditation basis? Like, I am an athletic trainer by trade, so I'm an allied health professional, teach in the master's level here. I went through all of my education with specific objectives, specific skills that I needed to learn, with the idea of a certification exam at the end of it that was a national-based exam. So everything that I was taught in my classroom was very similar to what was taught at other universities, because our goal was this ultimate certification. And you have that same thing across allied health, and in graduate levels, you're looking at law, and where you have some sort of exam that standardizes the education. Do you see assessment maybe moving to something like that in biology or sociology? So now you're also trickling down to where the student can't just get an A in a class because they have to pass some sort of national exam at the end, and can sort of push these things forward.
Thanks. So for a lot of people, they're like, oh, you can never assess learning at the end of a program. In fact, as you say, in about a quarter of the fields already out there, it already happens. Nursing, athletic, allied health, your field, engineering. Education, right, thank you, teacher. So this already exists in many fields already. So it can happen. It's a question of political will, and then it's a question of how do you do it and for what purposes. I'm not convinced that, I'll say it a little stronger, I am not in support of it being mandated and required for anything, because my key interest is in institutional improvement. And so I think it can be voluntarily adopted. My best case scenario is that we're actually able to design a few of these assessments tools, and faculty and departments voluntarily, some of them say, okay, I want to use this for accreditation. I want to use this. This is a good way for us to satisfy accreditation. Some of them might say, I think all of our students should do this as part of their graduation requirements. But again, I wouldn't want to mandate that for a field, although I guess if the professional association wanted to do it, that's where it should come from. It shouldn't come from a top-down source. Sir?
Yeah, first of all, let me just I spent 25 years in public schools, so you originally started this out, we can't look at, these are the kids we have right now. But I'm just curious, since 1983, we can't argue that K-12 has changed, dramatically, with the accountability movement, specifically the standardization movement since 1983. It's only gotten worse, from policy makers and all that. And I wonder, has anybody looked at what's happened over the past 30 years in public schools with the focus on standardization, the test, the content, all of those things? Has that led to some of what we're seeing now? So I guess, let me just follow this up. You said when you tested them on the college learning, you tested them freshman year, sophomore year, and then their senior year, right? But was there a pre-assessment done before they came in? Because I'm wondering how much of what we see now, and I'm just, I don't have any empirical evidence on this, but how much we're seeing now is, is a result of, could potentially be a result of what I've seen as a narrowing of the K-12 education curriculum, and that we need to think P20, and maybe institutions of higher education need to have more of a say in that K-12, in that K-12, area.
Yeah, so the first part of the question, we did look at this kind of where students came in with. We had measures of their SATs, their AP test scores, and their grades in high school. All those things very much predict their success in college. High school preparation is a huge factor in how they'll do in college and how much they'll learn once they're there. You're better off having preparation, in order to gain from the experiences you're having. With that said, however, I think it makes sense to think of it as a P20 system, but we don't want to make the mistake of blaming K-12 or P-12, preschool to grade 12, for the problem is there. The problem is we're doing as well as we can. They're coming to us as problem, and I think that's a mistake because you looked at the gaps came in college. You look at what the academic experiences were asking of them, right? It wasn't the high school teachers and their narrowing of the curriculum that decided we're not going to assign them reading and writing, and we're going to give them B pluses for no work. That was us. And so, would it help is there a problem in K-12? Yes, there's a problem. I started as a K-12 scholar. I was talking before. I kind of backed into this higher ed learning outcome research by accident. I won't bore you with that story. But I very much believe that we need to fix K-12, that there are problems not just around curricular content, there's even a much bigger problem around student discipline, and where I started my own academic work. But again, that's a whole other discussion as well. We need to fix K-12, but the best way to fix K-12 is not to go out there with higher ed telling them how to fix it, it's to go fix our own house first. And right now I feel like you can't do one without the other, and be honest with yourself and look yourself in the mirror anymore.
I don't understand how, I'm retired from teaching in the teacher ed program. And what I've seen and what I read in the New York Times last week got me so upset I was beyond upset. It was about a charter school network called Ascend. And it dawned on them that the way they set that school up was going to result in students who couldn't think critically, and they saw it happening. And so then all of a sudden they said, oh, well, maybe we have to move away from this militaristic discipline and no questioning and so on and so forth. I don't see how this is, at some point you have to walk it back and maybe join with people in P12 to fix this, because now I'm supervising student teachers and I see all kinds of problems. And I don't know how, yes, we have to fix higher ed. There are lots of folks who don't require much out of the students, but they're coming in with a skill gap, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. But that skill gap we have to go back. We have to figure out, well, what's going on here, and the stuff I've been reading about critical thinking is it has to be done in context. Otherwise, you're teaching them, it's like teaching them phonics and not connecting it to reading any words, which they used to do way back when I first started teaching. So I think that we have to figure out, do you have any ideas about how one would do that?
Well, so the charter school landscape is mixed.
Yes, I know.
There's a lot of variation in charter schools. Some are doing much better than traditional schools, some doing much worse. On average, about the same. So that's not going to be just moving to a charter system is not going to be a solution to anything. Let me go back to kind of the problems with higher ed. The work we did was around value-added assessment, right? They start here, the freshman year. Where are they? Their senior year. Is there a problem with where they're starting? Absolutely. Do we need to fix K-12 so that they're starting in a different place? Absolutely. If they're here for 4 years and they start here and they don't end any higher, or don't end, that's us. That's not them, that's us. We have to fix that. And so I think we have to acknowledge that and say it. And again, it's not to say we don't need to fix other things. We need to fix K-12 schools. Look at the problems in family structure in this country. Look at the growing economic inequality in society, and the people living in desperate poverty. These are complex problems, but again, our work starts with the things we can control and have responsibility for. I want to grab someone who, our dean, and then
I was just going to reinforce what you said, because I know you'll know this, and I've been sitting here for an hour trying to think of the researcher's name. Her paper was called Mind the Gap, but she really presented compelling evidence, about 12 years old now, that the expectations that students get in their freshman year for studying, for reading, they keep them all the way up to their senior year, no matter how many other things they add in. So if they add a job, if all we expect of them in the first year is 3 hours a week of studying, or 40, not more than 40 pages of reading or 20 pages of writing, no matter what happens, they just still revert back to that same expectation. And they add in work, and they add in social life, and they add in everything else, and they don't study more. So I think there's a lot of evidence. We can not want to say it's our problem, but it is our problem all the way through. So for us in the College of Ed, they start in freshman year, but they don't really come into the College of Ed in sophomore year. But if we don't pay attention to what happens then, we've lost already.
Yeah, and I think so, and speaking to a fellow dean at a college of education, we have a responsibility that 21st century university and 21st century school of education is not at the periphery of colleges and universities, it's at the center. Because the things we do in education research in an education school are critically important to these higher ed institutions to do their job better, right? We know how to train folks in pedagogy, in instruction, curriculum. We know how to do research on what's on student pathways and learning outcomes, right? It's not that K-12 doesn't have that. They don't have those resources in-house. We do, and we have a responsibility again to move from the periphery of colleges and universities, the poor cousin or sister, whatever, to be at the center of the modern university, identifying these problems and addressing these problems. And I think that's going to happen because all of a sudden people are going to ask these questions of higher education, maybe unfairly to some of the comments about students coming in unprepared. Maybe it's unfair, but they're going to ask these questions because this is what we have, and this is what we're doing with them, and we need to do better. And as the information gets out, so many kids came in at the bottom quintile and they didn't make it to the top. Why not? People are going to ask those questions, and we can be part of helping to answer those and improve those kinds of records. You haven't asked the question yet.
Okay, so talking about 21st century, we do have a lot of studies that we've seen and we observe people, but we have at our fingertips now a lot of science with studying brain scans, studying how we learn. Can that be, and is that becoming the driving force, and shouldn't we be looking toward that kind of learning, or that kind of teaching and instructing based on what we know about neuroscience or biopsychology?
I think the science is moving forward, and of course we need to incorporate that into our pedagogy and to our work. And I think there are all these breakthroughs around neuroscience, around the role of emotion in education, in particular. So I think that's very productive. I put that in the changing technology, changing science, changing technology around education.
But I see a lot of, I see what we're talking about now, and I'm afraid that if we don't really make that a big issue, that the same old patterns will, pendulum swings. But now we have something to interrupt the way that we traditionally think.
So I think we have, let me say, two things around this. So one is the science of learning. There's always been, it's been tough because you can't observe learning, right? Now you can with the technology. The neuroscience helps you observe what's actually happening in the brain in real time around learning processes. But let me say something else where you can observe it. The digital learning platforms make learning observable. So you have people working, online on something, and every keystroke is captured, and so you have pretty close to kind of a full record of people's miscues, mistakes, where they go back and iterate and so on. You have data on that where learning has become observable. Once learning is observable, you can do real science of learning around it. So it's happening. Personally, I think there's more action and potential in the digital measuring of learning than in the neuro mapping of it. But that's a conversation for later. That's just a personal hunch. But either way, the science is moving forward, and we can make use of that.
Richard, we're coming towards the end of our time, and I wanted to be sure to address one point before we leave, and that is, I stand ready to march with you, and I am sure that everybody here stands ready to march with you in addressing higher education's problem, our problem. And my question to you is a really basic question, but in terms of next steps for us here. We talked about changing the expectations of all the 17-year-olds in the country. We're not going to do that probably anytime soon. We talked about some of the organizational incentives and barriers to focusing on learning. Because we're all doing something else, and our jobs are organized, our organizations are organized around certain things, and we have to disrupt that in some ways. I wonder if you can help us, just leave us with something that we can do next week. Aside from reading the books. Aside from reading the book, and knowing, and being persuaded there's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I can speak a little bit to that. Remember, I'm a sociologist. When we do our work well, we can identify patterns and problems. Fixing them is our role. So I'm no more an expert in that than you are or anyone else around the table. My instincts on it is you have to kind of you start by working locally. You find people of like mind. Maybe they're within your department. That's a unit where you can make very concrete changes about intentionality of what students are experiencing. And so I came to Irvine, and we have a huge undergraduate program in education and science. Not training teachers, but learning education science, 800 majors. And I said, okay, well, can we do this concepts and competencies? And so we're doing that at Irvine. I mean, it helps to be the dean. But I think as a faculty member, I could have persuaded them as well. I definitely didn't mandate it. So you could come up with the concepts and competencies for your own programs and try and make sure that you were intentionally accomplishing those and assessing them. Or if you can't find like-minded people within your unit, maybe you can find them across campus. This is a select group. There's a selection bias here. Many people aren't in the room. The majority of faculty, the ones that are here, probably a good place to start. And there might be a teaching and learning center on campus that's a resource and effective. Maybe it's not. I don't know enough about the institution, but there are places that you could create conversations around and make a difference in this field. And I truly believe, although I don't have the answers, I truly believe that this problem is not, one, it's not going away. Two, it's going to become more visible, and it's going to become, people are no longer going to accept policymakers business as usual. If we don't fix it ourselves, we're going to increasingly be required to. And so in some ways it's good to be out front, be on the forefront of that, not sitting back, but being self-organizing, so when that moment occurs, you're empowered and positioned to move the institution forward. One last question, Marty, and then we're going to...
It'll be brief.
Yeah.
I was sitting here, and thank you for enlightening all of us, sharing. I was thinking more of starting with surveys, like asking students, graduate students, educators, questions about their input on certain issues, because we know it is an issue in the educational institution. We know that children from K through 12 have a lot of problems, or even, college students. But sometimes when you do a survey, you get more of the feedback. You get more of answers that you might can use to help you to come up with more information about how to solve the issue. So, just to add additional thought to what you're saying, that was in my mind, like a survey. I was sitting outside, like, well, maybe a survey would actually be something that could be like a starting point. But sometimes when you do a survey, you actually get more information. A lot of times people don't really tell the truth, but they give you an idea of what they're thinking. So I was just thinking as an additional thought.
I think that's a great idea. So the first thing I would, if you could organize yourself as a group, the first thing I would say is how do you convince your other colleagues that there's a problem here? The use of surveys, like let's go ask our students.
Get more data.
Get more data. The power, I'm a social scientist. I believe in the power of data and information, right? The survey, W.E.B. Du Bois, he was surveying citizens in Philadelphia about their housing conditions because he believed that the fact that so many people were living without bathrooms, if you could quantify it and put it up, would create a solution. And I believe in the same way, the power of data and information, you put that up there, that's, it doesn't fix the problem, but it can be a part of it. And let me say one other thing. So again, as I'm a social scientist, this work came out of this group called the Social Science Research Council. It was around since the 1920s in the US. the major foundations in the US at the time thought that in order to have a democratic society, you had to have social science. You had to create strong social science research to inform democracy. At the time, many of these disciplines, sociology, didn't really exist, or they were in their infancy. Social science can be part of a solution. And the panel that social science had in the 20s included Franklin Delano Roosevelt was on one of the panels. We now confront a moment in time, historically in our country, where science is called into question, facts are called into question. What is the solution to that? Social science, surveys. We have to hold people accountable to information, accurate data, and so could not be more critically important. So thanks everyone for your time.